Picture this. It's 1992. A fast-talking Brooklyn lawyer with a leather jacket, zero courtroom experience, and an accent thick enough to spread on a bagel walks into a small-town Alabama courtroom and somehow becomes one of the most beloved legal minds in movie history. Not because he went to Yale, not because he clerked for some Supreme Court justice, but because he knew how long grits take to cook, could spot a tire track discrepancy from across a room, and had a fiancée who understood positraction better than most automotive engineers. That movie was My Cousin Vinny, and it has been living rent-free in the heads of lawyers, gearheads, comedy fans, and late-night cable surfers for more than 3 decades. Released on March 13, 1992 by 20th Century Fox, the film starred Joe Pesci, Marisa Tomei, Ralph Macchio, Mitchell Whitfield, and the magnificent Fred Gwynne in what quietly became one of the most culturally durable comedies Hollywood ever accidentally made. And the key word there is accidentally, because almost nothing about this movie was supposed to work the way it did. The casting was a disaster before it came together. The location choices were genuinely unsettling. The script had personal baggage buried inside jokes, and the woman who nearly walked away with the entire film almost got cut before a single frame was shot. So today we're going deep. 15 facts about My Cousin Vinny that go far beyond what most fans already know. Some of these will make you appreciate the film differently. Some will make you feel genuinely bad for people involved. And at least one of them involves Joe Pesci walking into a recording studio 6 years after the movie came out and making a decision that nobody asked for and nobody has ever fully recovered from. Stay with me, because number 1 rewrites everything you thought you understood about who this movie actually belongs to. Let's start with the controversy that has followed this movie since the night of March 29, 1993. When Jack Palance stepped to the podium at the Academy Awards and announced Marisa Tomei's name as Best Supporting Actress, something strange happened in the room. People applauded, yes, but there was also a current of disbelief running underneath that applause, and it never fully went away. The problem was not Tomei herself. Everyone who saw the film agreed she was electric in it. The problem was the company she beat to win the award. Her competition that year included Vanessa Redgrave for Howard's End, Joan Plowright for Enchanted April, Miranda Richardson for Damage, and Judy Davis for Husbands and Wives. That is a murderer's row of dramatic prestige. So almost immediately after the ceremony, a rumor began spreading through Hollywood that Palance had read the wrong name from the envelope, that Tomei had won by accident, and that the Academy was too embarrassed to correct it publicly. That rumor has proven remarkably stubborn over the decades, despite the fact that it makes no logical sense whatsoever. Price Waterhouse accountants have been stationed backstage at every Oscar ceremony since 1953 specifically to prevent exactly this scenario. The entire point of their presence is to catch wrong names before they become history. When the famous La La Land and Moonlight mix-up happened in 2017, the correction came within minutes. Nobody corrected anything in 1993 because there was nothing to correct. Marisa Tomei won legitimately, clearly, and without question. She has been answering this rumor patiently in interviews for more than 30 years. And the wild irony is that her performance, the one people spent so long doubting, has only grown in reputation with time. A generation of viewers now considers Mona Lisa Vito one of the greatest comedic supporting roles ever put on screen. One of the most quoted exchanges in the entire film, the "What is a scene," was not written by anyone. It was spoken into existence by accident in a Manhattan hotel room before cameras ever rolled. Director Jonathan Lynn, who had earned a law degree from Cambridge before moving into filmmaking, flew to New York to sit down with Joe Pesci and work through the script together. Lynn is the kind of man who speaks in complete sentences and probably pronounces every syllable of every word with careful intention. Pesci is a man who grew up in Newark, New Jersey, and carries that fact proudly in every vowel he produces. As the two of them discussed the courtroom scenes, Pesci kept referring to the defendants as youths, except that in Pesci's thick New Jersey delivery, the word came out sounding more like youths. Lynn, genuinely confused, stopped him mid-sentence and asked what a Udo was. Pesci explained. Lynn immediately understood that the misunderstanding itself was funnier than anything a screenwriter could deliberately construct. He pulled out a pen and wrote the exchange directly into the script. Gwynne then delivered it in the film with the slow, exhaustive precision of a man who has presided over many difficult proceedings and has somehow landed in the most baffling one of his career. That 2-second exchange, born from a real language barrier between a British director and a New Jersey actor, became one of the most imitated moments in American comedy history. Most courtroom movies treat legal procedure the way action movies treat physics. The rules exist, technically, but they are suggestions more than anything else. Surprise witnesses appear from nowhere. Lawyers grandstand constantly. Judges allow things that would get an attorney disbarred in any real jurisdiction. My Cousin Vinny does something almost no other courtroom film bothers to do. It gets the procedure right. This is not an accident. Jonathan Lynn's legal background meant he approached the courtroom scenes with genuine respect for how cross-examination actually functions. He also attended a real murder trial during pre-production to observe the rhythm of proceedings firsthand. The result is a film that legal scholars and practicing attorneys have cited repeatedly in academic and professional contexts. The cross-examination technique Vinny uses throughout the trial tracks closely with principles articulated by attorney Irving Younger in his famous 10 Commandments of Cross-Examination, a framework taught in law schools across the country. The core rule is simple. Never ask a witness a question you do not already know the answer to. Vinny follows this instinctively. He does not swing wildly. He sets traps with short, plain-language questions and waits for witnesses to step into them. Professors have used specific scenes from the film to illustrate concepts, including witness impeachment, the importance of physical evidence, and the strategic use of expert testimony. Not bad for a man who spent most of the film being held in contempt for his wardrobe choices. The scene where Mona Lisa Vito takes the stand and dismantles the prosecution's entire case using a detailed analysis of automotive suspension systems looks like the product of extensive research. Consultants, car manuals, engineering textbooks. The kind of fact-checking that a production does when it wants to be taken seriously. Screenwriter Dale Launer did none of that. He has freely admitted in interviews that the entire technical speech came directly from his own adolescent obsession with American muscle cars. As a teenager, Launer could recite the engine displacement, horsepower figures, and mechanical specifications of virtually every domestic automobile on the market. He carried that knowledge around in his head for decades, and when he needed Mona Lisa to make a devastating courtroom argument, he simply opened a drawer in his memory and pulled it out. The argument itself is genuinely sound. The prosecution contended that the defendant's 1964 Buick Skylark left the tire tracks at the crime scene. Mona Lisa points out that the Skylark's solid rear axle would have produced uneven track marks under those road conditions. The actual tracks were too evenly spaced, consistent instead with a 1963 Pontiac Tempest, which featured independent rear suspension. She then deploys the word Positraction, Chevrolet's branded name for a limited slip differential, as the finishing blow. Gearheads have been debating the scene ever since, and Launer has cheerfully acknowledged one small error involving a third vehicle that could have matched the tracks. He knew about it when he wrote the script and gambled that no one at the premiere would catch it. He was wrong about that, running into exactly the right person at exactly the wrong moment. The bones of the argument still hold up after 30 years, which means a teenage boy's car obsession quietly became the intellectual centerpiece of one of the decade's best comedies. If your brain filed Ralph Macchio under perpetual teenager at some point in the 1980s, you are not alone. The man had spent the better part of a decade playing America's favorite young underdog, first in The Outsiders, then through the Karate Kid franchise. By the time My Cousin Vinny hit theaters in the spring of 1992, audiences looked at him and still saw a kid who should probably be doing homework. He was 30 years old. His daughter Julia was born in May of 1992, just weeks after the movie opened. So while audiences were watching him play a frightened college student on a road trip to UCLA, he was simultaneously becoming a father in real life. The man playing a kid had a kid. Macchio had been 22 when the original Karate Kid came out in 1984, already older than the character he was portraying. He had been playing younger than his age so consistently, for so long that neither audiences nor casting directors seemed to notice or care. My Cousin Vinny leaned directly into that perception, and it worked. The wide-eyed terror Bill feels throughout the trial lands partly because Macchio makes you forget you're watching a 30-year-old man with a wife and newborn at home. Decades later, Cobra Kai built an entire series around the comedic and dramatic weight of Daniel LaRusso finally, unavoidably, becoming middle-aged. The joke works because Macchio still looks eerily young. He credits genetics and a healthy lifestyle. The rest of us are simply grateful and slightly suspicious. Fred Gwynne carried a very specific burden through much of his career. For an entire generation of television viewers, he was Herman Munster, the lovable, lumbering Frankenstein's monster in a cardigan who made being undead seem like the most wholesome possible lifestyle. Escaping that image proved nearly impossible for most of his professional life, which makes his performance as Judge Chamberlain Holler in My Cousin Vinny all the more remarkable. From the moment Gwynne appears on screen in that black robe, the sitcom father vanishes entirely. In his place stands something genuinely imposing, a judge of absolute authority and impeccable dignity, quietly enduring the most chaotic legal proceedings of his judicial career with expressions that range from mild confusion to barely concealed despair. What audiences did not generally know was the depth of the man behind the performance. Gwynne was a Harvard graduate, a former president of the Harvard Lampoon, and a member of an elite a cappella singing group. He was also a successful children's book author with a particular gift for wordplay and linguistic humor, which gives his reactions to Vinny's verbal fumbles an extra layer of meaning. That is a man who understands exactly what is happening to the English language in his courtroom and is choosing, with great effort, not to comment on it. Gwynne passed away from pancreatic cancer in July 1993, approximately 16 months after the film's release. My Cousin Vinny was his final theatrical role. The arc from Herman Munster to Judge Holler represents one of the more quietly moving second acts in American entertainment history. Every courtroom drama has its signature moment of revelation. Usually it involves dramatic music, a lawyer pacing the length of the room, and a witness crumbling under the weight of some devastating document. My Cousin Vinny achieves its most effective courtroom moment through breakfast food. A prosecution witness testifies that he observed the defendants entering a convenience store right as he began cooking his morning grits. 5 minutes later, he claims, he was sitting down to eat when he heard the gunshot that would become the centerpiece of the murder case. His testimony creates a tight, clean timeline that places Bill and Stan at the scene at exactly the right moment. Vinny, who has been spending his Alabama evenings getting acquainted with local cuisine, knows one crucial thing. Real grits do not cook in 5 minutes. Properly prepared, traditional Southern grits require closer to 20 minutes on the stove. And this particular witness had made a point of presenting himself as a serious Southern cook who would never compromise his standards by using the instant variety. The trap closes quietly and completely. The witness must now choose between admitting his timeline is physically impossible or confessing that he used instant grits, which destroys his credibility as a culinary authority and, by extension, as a reliable observer. Either answer helps the defense. The jury does not need a law degree to follow this. They just need to understand that breakfast is rules, and this witness broke them. It is, in its elegant simplicity, a perfect example of what makes Vinny's courtroom instincts genuinely formidable underneath all the chaos. The emotional foundation of My Cousin Vinny is not a fictional invention. It was built on a real moment of human persistence that screenwriter Dale Launer encountered during his college years and never quite forgot. Launer had met a man who was waiting on bar exam results. The man was remarkably calm about the possibility of failing because he had already failed before, multiple times. When Launer pressed on how many attempts the bar exam allowed, the answer stopped him cold. 13. Someone had failed the New York bar exam 13 separate times and kept returning. Launer did not feel pity or contempt. He felt something sharpen in the back of his mind that he recognized as a story. What if that was your lawyer, he thought. Not a polished graduate from an elite school, not someone who glided effortlessly through the system, but someone who the system had knocked down repeatedly and who kept getting back up anyway? That question became the entire moral engine of the film. The detail in the finished movie that Vinny passed the bar on his 6th attempt is not a throwaway joke. It is the whole character. In early drafts, Launer actually wrote Vinny as dyslexic, which would have explained how someone with obvious intelligence and sharp instincts could struggle so profoundly with written examinations. Director Jonathan Lynn removed the detail during development. Lawner has continued to voice his disagreement with that decision in interviews over the years, arguing that it added a layer of specificity and truth to the character that the film lost when it was cut. Before Joe Pesci was ever attached to My Cousin Vinny, there was another plan entirely, and it is one of those Hollywood what-if scenarios that makes your head spin. Fox chairman Barry Diller had an existing 3-picture deal with Andrew Dice Clay at the time the film was in development. Clay, at that point, was one of the most famous and controversial stand-up comedians in the country, known for his leather jacket persona, his deliberately crude stage material, and a level of mainstream visibility that made studio executives believe he could anchor a major theatrical comedy. The plan was to cast Clay as Vinny opposite Marisa Tomei. Clay has confirmed the offer in his 2014 memoir, and by some accounts, the pairing was seriously considered before it fell apart entirely. The collapse came from outside forces. A controversial appearance at the MTV Video Music Awards led to Clay being banned from the network for life. His management relationship dissolved. His public standing took significant damage in a short period of time, and the 3-picture deal quietly died alongside the rest of it. Screenwriter Dale Lawner's own preference for the role had always been Robert De Niro, whom he believed had a coiled comedic energy that the role required, pointing to De Niro's work in Midnight Run as evidence. The studio's response to that suggestion was a flat and decisive no, delivered with the confidence of people who would spend the next decade watching De Niro prove them comprehensively wrong and analyze this, and meet the parents. Pesci entered the conversation coming off the extraordinary double of Goodfellas and Home Alone, demonstrating in back-to-back films that he could flip between menace and comedy in the same breath. He turned out to be the only logical choice, which is the thing about perfect casting. It always looks obvious in retrospect. The screech owl scene is one of those moments that audiences assume must be the product of considerable mechanical trickery. The timing is too perfect. The visual is too absurd. The thing looks, quite frankly, like it was designed by a special effects team to maximize comedic horror. It was a real bird. That is the actual owl. No puppetry, no animatronic mechanism, no operator crouching out of frame with a remote control. Director Jonathan Lynn has stated in interviews that most viewers simply could not accept this as true because the comedic timing seemed too precise to be accidental. The production team did work with trainers to coax a specific behavior from the bird on camera. The technique they landed on involved placing a small piece of beef directly into the owl's beak just before filming. The swallowing reflex that followed would naturally cause the bird's beak to open in the seconds afterward, giving the crew a brief window in which the owl appeared to be unleashing a genuinely unhinged vocalization at Pesci's horrified face. One additional detail worth knowing: real screech owls do not actually make that sound. Their natural call is considerably more delicate, almost lullaby-like. The piercing shriek that accompanies the visual in the film was layered in during post-production. The demonic face, however, is entirely authentic. A generation of viewers developed an irrational wariness of nighttime forest sounds as a direct result, and the owl responsible was simply doing its job. The jail scenes in My Cousin Vinny carry an atmospheric tension that feels slightly off from the rest of the film. The comedy is still there, but something about those scenes feels heavier, colder, more real than the rest of the story. There's a reason for that, and it has nothing to do with set design. The production did not build a prison set. They filmed inside Lee Arrendale State Prison, a fully operational men's correctional facility in Georgia. The stone walls, the cell blocks, the echoing corridors, none of it was constructed for the movie. It was all already there, already in use, already inhabited by men serving actual sentences. Many of the background figures visible in those scenes were real inmates. The crew walked through active prison hallways to reach the set every single day, a journey that reportedly took 40 minutes and involved passing through cell blocks where prisoners called out to the cast and crew the entire way. Mitchell Whitfield, who played Bill's friend Stan, has spoken in interviews about the experience of trying to perform comedy scenes while genuinely uncomfortable people surrounded them. The editors apparently had to work carefully with some of the audio captured during filming. When you watch Ralph Macchio and Mitchell Whitfield look terrified in that prison, You are watching actors who had legitimate reasons to feel unsettled. The authenticity you pick up on is not manufactured. It was the environment itself. In 1998, 6 years after the movie was released, Joe Pesci walked into a recording studio, assumed the character of Vincent LaGuardia Gambini, and made a full-length album for Columbia Records. This happened. It is real. It is not a lost sketch or an internet hoax. The album, titled Vincent LaGuardia Gambini, Sings Just For You, is a genuinely eclectic collection of material. Lounge standards share space with novelty tracks, jazz-inflected numbers, and holiday songs. There is a Christmas offering that you should under no circumstances play around children. The production is professional. The intent seems completely sincere. Pesci had roots in music that predated his acting career by years. He played guitar in a band called Joey D and the Starlighters in the New Jersey music scene, and had developed an extensive comedy lounge act with actor Frank Vincent, who genre fans will recognize from various mob-adjacent projects. Music was never foreign to him, even if the specific project of making a mob character concept album was admittedly a niche idea. The track that most people remember, and that most people struggle to believe exists, is a hip-hop song called Wise Guy, in which an Academy Award-winning actor raps in full character over a sample from Blondie's Rapture. The song received an official music video featuring supermodel Naomi Campbell. Critics were not kind. The album peaked at number 36 on the Billboard Heatseekers chart and vanished from public consciousness shortly afterward. It survives today as one of those late 90s cultural artifacts that requires multiple viewings of the evidence before acceptance is possible. My Cousin Vinny opened in second place at the box office in March 1992, behind Wayne's World, which was essentially unmovable that spring. Its opening weekend gross was roughly $7.4 million against a production budget of around $11 million. Respectable, not spectacular. Industry observers noted it and moved on. Then something started happening. The film barely dropped in its second weekend, or its third. Audiences were not just attending once, they were telling other people. The studio began quietly discussing sequel possibilities within weeks of the opening. By the end of its theatrical run, the film had earned back its budget several times over. But the real transformation came with home video and cable television. Once My Cousin Vinny entered rotation on TBS and TNT, it became a different kind of phenomenon entirely. People who had seen it in theaters watched it again on Saturday afternoons. People who had missed it entirely discovered it on cable and immediately started quoting it at work. Marisa Tomei's Oscar win in March 1993 sent another wave of viewers to the film just as its home video availability was expanding. By the late 90s, it had quietly become one of the most rewatched comedies of the decade. Comedy fans were placing it alongside Caddyshack and Airplane in terms of rewatchability. Lawyers were using it in seminars. Car enthusiasts were citing it in forums. A film that opened modestly in second place had, through sheer word of mouth and cable repetition, become genuinely canonical. The most uncomfortably funny supporting performance in My Cousin Vinny belongs to Austin Pendleton as John Gibbons, the court-appointed public defender, whose stutter is so severe that sentences appear to get physically stuck on their way to the room. Audiences laughed at the character because the performance was brilliantly, precisely timed. Most of them had no idea what it had cost the actor to deliver it.